So today, we're looking at another king of Israel, of Judah. And you're gonna hear me use the word "you" a lot here, because this message is a little bit different. This message is targeting, that's a dangerous word today, but it is. It's targeting our young people. It's aimed at you. It's aimed at kids, youth, kids in between 6, 8 years old, up to 18, 20. It's aimed at you. And we are all going to benefit, and we are all going to grow because of this. We're all going to be challenged by it. We're all going to be moved to repent and follow God and trust ourselves wholeheartedly to God, just like I have been all week. So when I say you, I'm not excused from this endeavor, this relationship with God either, but I am going to be using that word. And even though it's targeting young people primarily, the context of the king we're going to be looking at, King Josiah, is set in 2 Chronicles, and part of the theme of 2 Chronicles, and really the whole Bible, is: can we trust God? Can we believe in Him? And the way we use that word today, believe in Jesus, right? Sometimes we misuse that word. The whole thrust of the gospel is, will God do what He says He will do? And that's a two-sided question. Will God be faithful to me? Will He be faithful to His promises? The ones of blessing and safety and joy that are found in Him. But there's another side to that believing in God. Will He do what He says He will do? Will He punish evil? Will He do justly? Will He keep me in line when I want to walk away from Him? Will He make sure that I stay separated and stay His? And that's the faithfulness of God at work. That's believing in God. Will He do what He says He's going to do? And as for us, if we believe in God, if we believe in who He is, and if we believe that He will do what He says He's going to do, then our actions are informed by that, and it informs our living. And that's called living for Him. Trusting in Jesus is right along the same parallel track. It's believing in God through Jesus, because Jesus came to show us the Father. And we can trust and know the Father through Jesus. So that's the mini sermon for all of us older folks. The rest to come is about someone a lot younger than me and than many of us. So I only saw like 4 kids up here, but I know there's more in the auditorium here. And I know there's more with parents who are watching online. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this situation a little bit more before we dive into this king's life. Okay. So we're talking about Josiah, 2 Chronicles 34. Josiah had a grandpa, just like all of us. Some of our grandpas aren't alive, but Josiah had a grandpa. And Josiah's grandpa wasn't like your grandpa, probably. He wasn't like my grandpa. He wasn't like the ideal grandpa. Josiah's grandpa was a very evil and violent man. Josiah's grandpa was a leader in evil. And 2 Chronicles 33:9 says that Josiah's grandpa Manasseh led the country, led Judah astray, so that they did more evil around them than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites were there. We can see that Manasseh did not believe in God for much of his life. He did not believe in the promises of God, and he did not believe that God would be faithful to actually hold him in line. And so he did a whole bunch of evil as a king of Israel. And he was Josiah's grandpa. He filled up the temple with idols. Can you imagine if this place was filled up with shrines and burning incense to other gods and such? That's what Manasseh did. He filled up the temple with images and idols and altars. And it wasn't supposed to be that way. God says, I don't have a form. I don't have a body. And so when Manasseh filled up all of the temple with these images, what do you think? How do you think that affected the people? How do you think that affected maybe Josiah? Here's this temple with all these images. Who do you think people are going to want to worship? The thing they can see, or the thing that they've never seen? The thing that they can't see? So he made it very hard for people, including Josiah. And Josiah's dad wasn't much better than Manasseh. Josiah's dad was named Amon. And here's what we learn about Josiah's dad when he became king. He was 22 years old. That's pretty young to become king. He reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. This is in 2 Chronicles 33:21. And he reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord as his father had done. Amon worshipped and offered sacrifices to all the idols that Manasseh had made, same kind of idols. But unlike his father, Manasseh, he didn't humble himself before the Lord. In fact, he increased his guilt. Amon's officials conspired against him, and they actually assassinated him in his palace. The people of the land found out who had killed him, and they killed those people, and they made Josiah king. And in verse 1 of chapter 34, says that Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. So here's Josiah, okay? We've learned about his history, we've learned about his family, we've learned about his grandpa and his dad. And we've seen that Josiah has the worst kind of role models in his life. King Josiah has the worst kind of role models in his life. They're violent, they're unfaithful, they're not what young Josiah needs. So the question is Josiah just a victim? What can we expect of Josiah? What can we anticipate from him? Is he just a product of his environment, right? If you grow up in a good home, you'll grow up and you'll be a good person. If you grow up in a bad home, well, you're going to grow up and be a bad person. Is that true? There's more to it than that, and we can see that in Josiah's life. Is Josiah going to follow the example of his friends and family? Well, 2 Chronicles does something we would never do. It gives you a massive spoiler right at the beginning. And for me, this is kind of frustrating. But God did it, and so I accept it. It's at the beginning, right at the beginning. It says in verse 2 that Josiah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and he followed the ways of his father, not turning to the right or to the left. So right at the beginning, right when we find out Josiah is 8, he's young, like many of you, little younger than many of you. We find out that against all odds, against all bets, Josiah followed the ways of his ancestor, his father David, right, way back, and he did what was right, and he didn't turn aside to the right or the left. He stayed true his whole life. His whole life. In fact, 2 Kings 23:25 says, "Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, in accordance with the law of Moses." Never before, never after was there a king like Josiah in that he turned He broke this pattern, this cycle. Right at the end of Israel's rope, Josiah followed God. So what happened? What happened to Josiah? How did he avoid the sins of his family and his culture? To get a glimpse of this, we're just going to read verses 3 to 7. In the 8th year of his reign, well, he was still young. So he started to become king when he's 8. Now he's 8 years in. That makes him 16. He began to seek the God of his father David. So he's 16. He's really young. He's probably just beginning to take on some of the duties and roles of a king. Maybe not all of them yet, but some of them. And in his 12th year, so 4 years after beginning seeking the Lord, he's 20. In his 12th year, he began to purge. That means get rid of, in Judah and Jerusalem, all the high places and the Asherah poles, the idols. These are all idols that Israel was worshiping. He started to get rid of them. Under his direction, the altars of the Baals were torn down. He cut to pieces the incense altars that were above them and smashed the Asherah poles and idols. These he broke into pieces, and he scattered them over the graves of all those who had sacrificed to them. And in that way, he's showing these things can't save you. These things can't help you. They're not true gods, and you've been shamed by them. He burned the bones of the priests on their altars, and again, he defiled them. And he purged Judah and Jerusalem. In the towns of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, that's all the way from bottom, little Judah that's all on its own because the Assyrians had captured northern Israel. Little Judah's left. Well, Josiah's impact went all the way up into northern Israel, far past his territory. It expanded to his family and perhaps relatives who were left in that area, who hadn't been taken but survived. That's where his influence went. He tore down the altars and the Asherah poles and crushed the idols to powder and cut to pieces all the incense altars throughout Israel. Then he went back to Jerusalem. So Josiah went on a tear. He went through the country, up and down, back, like all the way back, and he got rid of these things so that they would stop being a snare and a trap to his people, his friends, perhaps family. Now, if you're a young person right now and you're listening to this, I want you to really give this your attention. Whether you're 8 or 13, like I said at the beginning, or in high school or just started college, that's the spectrum that we're covering of Josiah's life. And we're all going to benefit by it, but again, this is for you. God works in the hearts of the young. God works in the hearts of the young. If you look throughout the Bible, many of the people who had the biggest impact and stuck with God and were faithful to Him, knowing that He's faithful to them, many of those key people started out as young people. They decided to make God their first in life. And their faith typically remained through hard times. And you can think of people like Joshua. Joshua, who joined with Moses, became Moses' assistant. And who was it that ended up leading the people into the promised land when Moses didn't get to go? It was Joshua. Joshua started when he was young. Think of King David, who became the greatest king that Israel ever had sit on the throne as of yet. On the physical throne, David followed the Lord in his youth. He was committed to God in his youth. When the older guys weren't stepping up in faith, David did, because he believed in God and committed himself to God. And think of Samuel. Right? Samuel was given when he was very little to service. And God spoke to him. God used him. God was faithful to him. When you give yourself to God when you are young, he can and will do great things in your heart, and we can't predict what he'll do in your community, in your family. And lastly, think of Jeremiah. Jeremiah began his prophesying ministry as a youth in the 13th year of Josiah's kingship. He said, I'm just a youth. God used him. He stayed faithful all the way until God was faithful and took Israel out of the promised land so that they would see, I am faithful. God is faithful. I am faithful to my word. I will do what I said. You can trust me to save you. You can also trust me to discipline you when you need to turn your eyes back on me. God is faithful. God works in the hearts and the lives of young people. You're never too young to seek God. And we could keep going on this. We could keep looking at more examples, but I think we get it. God works in the hearts and the lives of young people. Much later in history, when Jesus' disciples wanted to know who was the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, here's what Jesus says in Matthew 18:3. Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You won't even enter if you don't change and become like these little children. These little children who just trust God, believe what he says, obey what he says, know that he's good for his word. He's good on it. Did you know that some research shows that if you have a group of 10 Christians, 8 of them will probably have come to Christ when they're in between the ages of 4 to 14. In between the ages of 4 to 14, there's this recognized window. This is when most Christians come to Christ. And God is faithful, and so he still works in us older folks. And we're all living examples of his ongoing work in our life. But that's the window where most Christians turn to Christ. And for us older Christians, what does that say about our ministry? How does that inform our kids' ministry and the importance we put on it? Right? This should really encourage us because God is working there. God is faithful there. He will work there. And you know, the older you get, sometimes the harder it is to turn to Jesus. There's more distractions. There's more responsibilities. And sometimes, as people get older, they think, well, I'll just wait. Sometimes young people think that. I remember thinking that as when I was younger, I thought, well, can't I just wait? Why do I have to do this now? Can't I just wait and live for myself for a while and then turn that corner? I didn't know how foolish that was. I didn't know how awful that was. But I did know, and again, I believe this was from God and godly people in my life, that the older you get, the harder it is to die to self and to live for Christ. And the more painful it is, and the more regrets you have. And this is serious, serious business. Young people, God is calling you. He wants to work in you. He wants you to be in a relationship with him. He wants you to start seeking him. So learn from Josiah, this 8-year-old king who grew up and started seeking the Lord while he was young, because you're never too young for God to work in your heart. Another reason to start early is that seeking God's a journey. And we see that in this passage. It says Josiah began. He began to seek the Lord. He began his journey. And this journey takes time. You don't start out knowing everything. And this journey, it doesn't stop when you're 40 or when you're 80. It doesn't stop when you start to lose your hair or get gray in your beard or get wrinkles. It doesn't stop there. God is in this for the long haul, all the way to the end of our lives. That is how faithful he is, and beyond. And there are riches for those who begin while they're young and dig deep and begin to seek the Lord. There are incredible riches there. And on this journey, as you get to know God and know how much he loves you, you will want more of him. You will. He will change you on the inside out. And you might not understand this now, but on this journey with God, he changes you on the inside. He fills you and he completes you. He's really the missing piece. And we have all sorts of distractions in life that draw us away from seeking God, following God, making him that one thing. All sorts of distractions in life. And they just keep multiplying over the generations. They just keep getting more and more. But with God's help, you too can begin to seek him. So don't wait, kids, youth, young adults. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Don't wait for a magical moment to happen. If that's what you're waiting for, God's inviting you in. He's inviting you in to partner with him and choose him because he chose you. Don't settle for second best like Josiah's grandpa did, who turned to God at the end of his life. Don't make the mistake that Josiah's dad made and miss your chance. Josiah's dad didn't see his end coming. And that's part of the danger of thinking you can just live for yourself as long as you please, and one day you'll commit yourself to God and choose him. Josiah's dad never got to make that choice because he didn't know the end of his days, and he died far younger than he thought he would. If you haven't begun to seek the Lord, talk to your parents. Talk to the people you came with. Talk to me. Talk to the people you've seen on stage. Mr. Wayne's been some of your Sunday school teacher. He's taught Sunday school to you for years. Talk to him. So now that we've seen the importance, you guys, of seeking God when you're young, we're going to zoom in on what it means to seek God. And we see this in two places in the book of 2 Chronicles. We see it in 2 Chronicles 7:14, and we see it a little bit later in Josiah's life, although his whole life demonstrates this seeking. If you want to see what it means to seek God, you can see it in Josiah's life, in his actions, in his choices, in the things he did and prioritized. But it really is focused in on these two passages. The first passage is many of us have heard this passage before, but this is what it says in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. That is God's promise to his people. And the first thing that we're going to see is we see humility. We see humbling, right? Humble yourselves. This isn't something that God is forcing on them. God is calling them. So he is calling them, but he is calling them to humble themselves. He wants them to partner with him. Humble yourselves. When you humble yourself, you're saying, God, I need you. I can't do this on my own, and I don't want to do it on my own. I want to do it with you, and I'm willing to do it your way. I'll live how you tell me to live. When I'm in trouble, I won't try and solve everything on my own strength. And when you fix things, I won't take the credit. I won't say it was because of me. I won't say this because I did something so great. I'll ask you to show me what's important, and I'll go after those things. And when I succeed, I'll tell others about you. You're the one that lifts my head. You're the one who gives me success. All I have is actually because of you. That is the posture of someone who is humble. And we see that in Josiah's life, especially later on, where in 2 Chronicles 34:27, and this is the other verse we're going to keep coming back to. 2 Chronicles 34:27 twice talks about Josiah's humility. He says, because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before God when you heard what he spoke against this place and its people, because you humbled yourself before me and tore your robes and wept in my presence, I have heard you. God is faithful. He heard. He heard Josiah's cry. He heard Josiah's prayer. He saw Josiah's actions. The second thing about seeking God is that it means praying. So it means humbling, it means praying. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray. That's 2 Chronicles 7:14. And we see this, again, in Josiah's life. When he found out about the sin in his life, he tore his robes, he humbled himself, he wept in the Lord's presence. But notice that God says, I have heard you. I have heard you. The implication is that along with all of this, Josiah is crying out to God. Maybe it's just in his heart. Maybe it's through his mouth. Something about Josiah's posture, his actions, something came through as a prayer to God. God heard him. When you find yourself in trouble, when you find yourself in sin, pray. God's saying, come to me, talk to me, just ask me. Just ask me and I'll forgive you. Trust me and cry out to me. Believe in me. Again, this is the heart cry of God. Pray, believe in me. Believe that I will answer your prayers. Believe that you can trust me. Young and old, seeking God means that we pray. And we pray as a habit of our life. You can tell God when you've failed. You can tell God when you've sinned. He already knows you're not perfect. He knows this. That's why he tells us to cry out to him. He's already moving to help you. But we have to open up to him and be honest, because he's inviting us to talk to him. And the third thing that we definitely see here, and there's at least three, but we're going to focus on these three, is that seeking God means turning. It means turning from sin. When we humble ourselves and we cry out to God, we must turn. Because if you don't turn, it's pretty hard to say, but I've humbled myself. Right? Turn from their wicked ways. That's what it says in 2 Chronicles 7:14. Turning from sin doesn't mean all of a sudden you're perfect. It means that now, instead of moving towards sin, you've turned and you're moving away from it. And that is your life habit. That is your life habit. That when God shows you your sin, just like he showed Josiah his sin and the sin of the land, Josiah turned. And that is the humble, repentant response that God is looking for. In Josiah's life, there were a lot of things to get rid of. There's a lot of things to get rid of. Just look at everything he had to reject and throw out. We see that in verses 4 to 7. Under Josiah's direction, the altars of the Baals were torn down, cut to pieces. The incense of the altars, they were smashed. The Asherah poles, the idols, that's just starting in verse 4. Breaking them to pieces, scattering them over the graves of those who'd sacrificed to them. And we know he went all the way through Israel and back home. And he threw it all out. He threw it all away. And no doubt, some people would have been mad about this. Some people would have not understood. He would have lost friends and allies over this. It costs us something to follow God. We must be prepared to throw it all out, because the promise is that he's worth it all, that God is actually worth it all. That's why our relationship with Jesus is the pearl of great price. You don't sell it. You don't get rid of it. You keep it. All the stuff that he threw out, it should show us that we've got stuff in our own lives that we need to throw out. Kids do. Young adults do. I do. We're to turn and get rid of them. And this is so important. To the best of your ability, turn. Get rid of those things. Sometimes it's going to be friendships, guys. Sometimes it's going to be friendships who are always dragging you down the wrong path. You got to be prepared to get rid of them. And maybe God will bring you back to them when he's restored you and when you've seen his faithfulness. Maybe someday he will. But he calls us to be able to get rid of those things, to pursue him. Sometimes those things are physical things, right? Those things that constantly lure us and blind us and take away our opportunity to go to God. Right? Most of us, we know that there's things like that in our life, and most of us resist them for far too long. But God really is faithful, and we're called to give that stuff to him and throw it out and seek God. So if we're seeking God, we are called to humble ourselves. We're called to throw out the things that need to be thrown out. And we're called to pray and ask God for forgiveness and help as we seek him. And we can know that even in young ones, he works and he is faithful. Amen. Worship team, please come up.